Tom Horner, international judge, member of the Kennel Club, a past chairman of the Bull Terrier Club, and now managing director of Ormondy Limited, and known to everybody for your books that you've written on dogs and for your many, many articles in the canine press. However did it all begin?
Well, it began 54 years ago when I was supposed to be attending a series of lectures at the Regent Street Polytechnic on building construction. As the heir presumptive to my family's building firm, Ashby and Horner in the City of London, I was supposed to go and learn about building. But I found that building was a difficult and confusing thing, being totally non-mathematical, and I also found it very boring. So instead of going to the Poly that night, I went to the White City, where the People newspaper was holding a dog show. And then, attracted to a very loud, cacophonous sort of noise, I went across to see what was happening, and it turned out to be the Bull Terrier ring. And there, two large, burly men were making their way into the ring, back to back, each with a white bitch with a black spot on her on one eye, making their way into the ring. The bitches yelling blue murder at each other, which was even more dramatic when the two men put them on the ground for the judge to look at them. Those two were Champion Isis Io and Isis Pax. They belonged to Mrs. Mallam of Oxford, and I forget the judge's name, but there was quite a scene while those two were being judged, and it made quite an impression upon a young 20-year-old.
I think it made an impression on everybody.
Well, they rather hooked me on bull terriers, but even more important to what happened in the future was that on the bench, not taking part in the show, was a dog, a bull terrier dog, with a tremendous head, a very high-set eyes, and a most evil expression. That turned out to be Velhurst Viking.
How did it actually appeal to you as a total newcomer to bull terriers?
Well, I thought this was a splendid breed that fought to the death and did everything they shouldn't do, and thoroughly rebellious, like me not going to the Poly, going to the dog show instead. So I thought this was probably the breed for me. But then I was 20, and then a few months later I became 21, and I decided that despite the promising prospects financially, that building was not for me. I'd always been more interested in the countryside and animals than anything to do with the city or practical building sort of thing. So I pulled out, and I decided to go in for dogs. But at that time, the most interesting writer in Dog World, good old Dog World, where it cost 4p a week in those days, was Mrs. Noni Fleming. She was one of the top breeders in Cairn Terriers, and her prefix was Out of the West. And I wrote to her and said, how can I make a good start in dogs? And she said, come and work for me. I'll teach you about dogs. Well, I went, but Mrs. Fleming and I didn't get on very well. We had incompatible temperaments. And after a few months, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. And just at that moment, a notice appeared in Dog World again that the Velhurst Bull Terriers needed a pupil. That just had to be me.
Yes.
And I wrote in, and I was asked to go to the kennels near Horsham in Sussex for an interview. And the first view I had of anyone to do with Velhurst was of Miss Weeper Wetherell, bent over, dealing out condign punishment to two characters known as Velhurst Villain and Velhurst Varmint, and they were well named. They were about 8 months old, sons of Viking. They lived together, and about 11 a.m. each day they had a battle. And each day they got a better leathering from Miss Wetherell. I was asked into the house and led into the lounge, where I was asked to wait. And to my utter horror was this dog who'd made such a tremendous impression on me, Belhurst Viking, lying in front of the fire with his huge head on the fender. I learned later that Simon, as he was known to the family, was a perfect gentleman, and ever since he has been my ideal character for a bull terrier, a perfect gentleman. I managed to persuade them that I was a suitable pupil, and I was accepted. I had, in view of the fact that the kennels were owned by Captain and Mrs. Phillips, hoped that I would be instructed by a male, well, partly anyway, instructed by a male member of the family, but Captain Phillips had a job, of course, and Miss Wetherall was in charge of the kennels. We gave me a very thorough grounding in bull terriers and other dogs because they had a boarding section as well as a bull terrier kennel.
So that was really your first experience with the other dogs, apart from the Cairn Terriers?
That's right. I'd never really had... We'd owned dogs, but they'd all been mongrels. My father, who was a doctor and should have known things, I bullied the family for many years that I wanted a dog, and eventually they gave in. And my mother said, well, there's one thing, it's got to be a male. And my father was a police surgeon, and he consulted the police on most subjects, and they found him a nice dog for me, an 8-week-old puppy, which we called Toby. He's had a curly tail, a prick ears, and a black and white coat. And when she was 6 months old, I thought, well, I better buy a license. But he was 6 months old, Toby. And it was that very day he jumped the garden gate and went off with a whole pack of dogs. 9 weeks later, Toby produced 13 puppies, everyone a different type. So my father got a bit of a ribbing from my mother about what doctors should know about the difference between a dog and a bitch. But anyway, I stayed for a year at Belhurst, and then I thought that if I was going to go in for dogs seriously, I'd better learn more about other breeds.
Was there much opportunity for you at that time? Not just for you, but for anybody wanting to enter into working with dogs as a career?
Yes, I think there were. There were big kennels and who had kennel managers and kennel staff, and there were quite good jobs going. In those days, there were quite wealthy people in dogs who kept large numbers of dogs. And one of the kennels I went to was the milling family, Ranks, James Ranks, who had a kennel of Great Danes and Irish Wolfhounds. There were 30 champions in the kennel, 20 Danes and 10 Wolfhounds. And that was managed by Mr. Bill Siggers, who later became a world-famous all-rounder. And I learned a lot there about conformation and movement. We had excellent facilities for exercising the dogs loose, and no dog lived in that kennel unless it was a good mover, because Mr. Rank, who was also a horse breeder, would not have a bad mover. And I learned a lot about movement there. And then I went to other kennels of various kinds, a bulldog kennel, because I thought that was associated with bull terriers. That was the Leod Rides, owned by Arthur and T. Smith, and various others, Cockers, Jacksons, and so on and so forth. Then about that time, a young man named Raymond Oppenheimer appeared on the scene after about another year, and buying champion bull terriers left, right, and centre. And I wrote to him and asked if he would needed me to look after his dogs. I got a reply by the next day, of course, by return of post, being Mr. Oppenheimer. It came by the earliest possible post. And he said, no, he didn't need me. Disaster. My life went flat.
Yes.
But a fortnight later, he telephoned to say, would I go and see him? And it transpired that the kennel manager had his present kennel manager had turned over the kennel car for the second time and was about to leave. And would I go and see him? I think I got the job of running Ormondy because I said to Raymond, was his prefix Ormondy an anagram of his name Raymond? Raymond was a crossword fanatic all his life. Many years later, I met him in the main part of Olympia, walking down the centre aisle, completing the crossword, Times crossword, when he was a member of the Kennel Club. Quite oblivious to all that was going on at Crufts, because of course it wasn't Bull Terrier Day. So he really wasn't interested at all. But there he was doing the Times crossword. Anyway, things went on a bit. We managed to one of the things that had struck me about the two fighting bitches, Isis Io and Isis Pax, was that they were called by a dog called Rubislaw, who, Rubislaw was something to do with granite, and the way they behaved, I thought that was a pretty appropriate name.
Yes.
Well, one of the bitches in the kennel that Raymond had bought was Champion Cedron White Queen, and she had a full sister, Champion Queen High of Brum, who belonged to Mrs. Clifford Turner. And Miss Cedron White Queen had been bought from Mrs. Clifford Turner, but the two bitches were such enemies that she couldn't put up with them together. She was glad to get rid of Meg, the big one, and she was at Ormondy. And she was by Rubislaw, and we decided that as the Potters, who were the top breeders at that time, and always did half-brother, half-sister matings with a common sire, that we should find a son of Rubislaw to mate to this daughter of Rubislaw. And we did find a little dog who eventually became a champion, Crackton Cavalier. And everybody thought we were quite mad because we were mating son and daughter of Rubislaw together. Rubislaw was quite a terrifying character whom everybody was rather frightened. He was really, and his sons and daughters were pretty savage, except for little Cavalier, who was perfectly good. Well, from it came MacGuffin. And we won the Regent Trophy with him in 1939, and we did something else that no one had done before. We also fielded the runner-up, Silver Star.
Mm-hmm.
The Silver Star was out of a bitch which had been bought for £6. Miss Alderman of Ormondy. She managed to win 2 CCs before the war came and stopped stopped championship shows. Another interesting or amusing incident was when I was working for Raymond, the Bull Terrier Club held a members' show at a very small hall in Paddington, in London. And we went there, and it was very crowded. There was a tremendous entry in a tiny little ring. And Raymond said, well, you go around that way, and I'll go around this way and see if there's anything worth buying. Well, we met at the top of the ring, and we said, the one with 2 black ears, in one voice. And he said, well, go and see if you can buy it. And in the middle of the ring, there was a man with a very pretty bitch, 2 black ears. And I went up to him and talked to him and said, could I look at his dog? And he said, would he consider selling it? And he said, well, I want a lot of money. I said, how much? He said, more than £5. And I said, would you take £7.10? Oh, yes, he said, my wife would be ever so pleased. So Trixie came with me. Raymond reacted rather differently. Do you realize, he thundered, that you offered the man 50% more than the asking price? Kindly remember whose money you're throwing around. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't think about that. I just thought it was rather very little to pay for a possible champion. Trixie was a bit weak in front, but we worked on her, and she had her name changed to Ormondy Silver Star. Ormondy Silver Domino, and she became a champion in 5 shows.
Mm.
So that was the very first champion that he ever made up. I mentioned the sister of MacGuffin's mother, Cedron White Queen, Queen High of Brum. Mrs. Clifford Turner had bred from her, and Raymond had bought a granddaughter who was called Cedron Snow White. And she was mated to MacGuffin, and in the litter were 2 bitches, born early in 1939. One had a beautiful head and not much else. She had a dippy back and very loose in front and poor behind, but she had a lovely head, and Raymond wanted to keep her. The other one was a cobby little thing with everything right except a very strong, short, strong head, packed tight with fill-up, but not in the class of head of the other one. And I said to him, for goodness sake, keep that one. We argued for 3 days, and in the end, he gave in, and we kept the cobby one. And I think it's a measure of the man that he registered her as Tom's of Ormondy. And later in the war, during the war, she was mated to Champion Belhurst Vindicator, whom you see on the wall opposite, and she produced The Knave and Dancing Time, and Crackton Cavalcade, who sired the Sphinx, and 2 other bitches that contributed to the breed. So, luckily for me, it was a good choice.
Now, the war interfered with most people's careers. What happened to you?
Well, war broke out on the 3rd of September 1939. On the 2nd of September, Raymond Oppenheimer and I went to Harrogate Show, and we drove back in the blackout for the first time to find Ormondy House full of evacuee children when we arrived back. Dog people are mad, mad, mad. But the next day, we sat in the car on the ramp outside the kennels and listened to the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, declare war against Germany. And then, of course, the Kennel Club closed down on all championship shows, and very strongly advised a great restriction on breeding. They did not do what they'd done previously, which was to select various people who could breed and others who couldn't.
So when did they do that?
That was sort of right from the very beginning, within a few weeks of the beginning of the war. In November 39, I went into the army. There were 2 boys who worked with me in the kennels, George Berry and Sidney Ewers, and they carried on until the 1st of January 1941, when Eva Wetherall was appointed manager of Ormondy, and Raymond Oppenheimer went into the RAF shortly after that, sometime in 1941.
So, Tom, what did you actually do during the war yourself?
Well, it was a checkered career. I did very, very little of any use to the realm. I went to a recruiting office in November 1939, and they said, well, can you drive a car? I said, yes. They said, well, we can give you a lorry and you can be in France in the morning. Well, I thought perhaps Mr. Oppenheimer wouldn't be very glad if I took off in a lorry without telling him where I was going or what I was thinking of. And they said, so I said, well, no, what else have you got? And they said, well, there's a cavalry training regiment, a horsed cavalry training regiment, being founded at Shorncliffe Barracks in a fortnight's time. I thought, that's animals, that'll do me. Not tanks. I had dread of being shut up in a tank. So I went to a cavalry training regiment at Shorncliffe, and after 6 months, that was changed into a pack transport unit. That is a pack horse transport unit. And I stayed with that, with an RASC pack transport for 3 years. We toured Scotland and Wales and hilly parts of England extensively, mile by mile, on our feet, walking beside horses. And we got on a boat at Leith Docks at Edinburgh to go to Norway to assist in the war against the Germans there. But before we could sail, the Norwegians capitulated and we came off the boat and didn't go. After 3 years, I got rather tired of it, and I had a rather deliberate row with the CO, and I was posted to RAC holding base, and they posted me to Nigeria, where there was no blackout, and we were far from the war. But we formed a battalion of native troops to go to India, and eventually I went to India and then to Burma with this Nigerian battalion. We were just we did road maintenance, and the only members of the enemy I ever saw were 2 Japanese prisoners on the back of a lorry.
Oh, yes.
Going north.
And you left animals behind?
And I left animals behind, yes. I came back in 45, after the
Mm.
well, the war in Burma went on after the war in England and in Europe, and I came back at the end of that. When I came back, I took up farming. I got married, and Pat, my wife, bred a champion. It was Allwood, champion Allwood Sun Blinkers, before I had managed to breed one myself. And
So were the dogs just a sideline to the farming?
no, I started up some dogs. I kept some dogs. Raymond gave me a son of dancing time, Ormondy's Top Hat of Tartary, who was very small and never became a champion, but he was so well bred, he sired several champions. And I had a number of dogs and made up champions. I won the Regent Trophy with Champion Titania of Tartary, which was my prefix. It was taken from one of Peter Fleming's books, News from Tartary, which seemed a good, tough place to call it, to call bull terriers by. And I made up some champions. I exported a few, one or two that I shouldn't have exported, but one or two that to America, South Africa, Europe, Canada, Australia. They would send dogs out to all those places.
What was your thinking behind allowing your dogs to be exported?
I was a poor man. When I had a small income before the war, but after the war, I had to make a living, and it was a way of making a few bob, a few pounds. And I had a pig farm and a pig and fruit farm, but I had 3 children and I wanted to educate them, and it was hard work. And gradually the farm took over from the dogs, and in 1962 I sold the farm because I couldn't educate the children as I wanted to on that, and as a result I was able to educate them as I wished to. And then I joined Dog World and came back into the dog game. For quite a long time I'd sat on the Bull Terrier Club committee. I'd become a championship show judge of the breed. I had judged the Bull Terrier Club Championship show, and I had judged at Crafts. And then I became full-time working with dogs, which took me to every championship show in the country, most years. I stayed with Dog World for 20 years. But about the last 9 years, I remained in the office, and somebody else did the road work. But it was a great help to me. It assisted me to start as an all-rounder. I started by judging varieties and breeds at open shows and worked up to championship shows. And I'm now in the first 6 of the most qualified all-rounders in this country. I give CCs in 72 breeds.
Oh, gracious, yes. So, to return to the Bull Terriers, how did they progress after the war?
Well, there was before the war they were white. There were a few colours. There were only 3 pre-war, 4 pre-war coloured champions. And at the end of the war, Romany Reliance, who was a black tan and white, was a black brindle and white, with a tremendous head, a superb head, a really superb head, such as we'd never seen. But he had very moderate make and shape. He was by Ormondy Sunny Day out of the Romany Beach. And from there on arose the question. He sired a number of whites, which were very good indeed. And within 5 years, the colour-bred whites were as good as the purebred whites. And in 1950, the club held a special meeting to discuss the question of the purebred white and the colour-bred white. And the voting went that the colour-bred white be accepted as on equal standing with the purebred whites. Before the war, there had been one colour-bred white champion, Rebel of Blighty, and he had been refused permission to compete for the region trophy. Because before the war, there had been one colour-bred white champion, Rebel of Blighty, and he had been refused permission to compete for the region trophy because he was colour-bred white. Well, that was pure undiluted prejudice. And in 1950, all bull terriers were made equal. And from there on, they progressed very rapidly. The colours were very good in head, but a lot of them were very bad in make and shape. But breeders got together and they bred some very, very good stuff. Some good, very good colour-bred whites and some very good colours.
So what's the thinking behind this, if there are two equal bull terriers, brindle would predominate?
Well, it was found that at the end of when the colours came into the breed, there were an awful lot of pink noses, there were an awful lot of shelly bone, there was an awful lot of general lack of substance, and highly strung dogs.
Had that come from the colours,
Well,
do you
that
mean,
was the position with the purebred whites.
Yes.
When they were mated to brindles, we got full pigmentation, we got more substance, we got more stability of temperament. And that is the thinking behind the brindle. That it seemed there's something in brindle, particularly coloured, something in colour, particularly in brindle, it seems, that gives certainly pigmentation and more substance, more solidity, and more stability to the whites. If you go on breeding white to white to white, it runs out.
Yes.
You lose pigmentation, you lose power and substance, you lose stability. And a dose of brindle seems to be able to check that.
Yes. Another point, you were mentioning just now that one of the dogs had the sort of head that none of you had ever seen before, and it was beautiful in that direction. How do you compare a dog from that time with a dog today?
I would say there are more extreme heads today, but there are very few as good as Reliance, as Phil was Reliance. He was completely clean, very broad, and filled right up, and a very imperious outlook.
Was he just a one-off, or did he produce
No,
those?
he produced, well, until then, the colours would perhaps produce one good one and then a whole lot of nothing. But Reliance produced good one after the other. He was the first coloured that really could be relied upon to produce good stuff. He was concentrated line breeding. D. Montague Johnson had concentrated her best blood throughout the war. And he was out of a bitch called Romany Rivet, who was a very good bitch behind the collar, with a very strong but rather plain head. And he was by Ormondy Sunnyday, who was by a combination of Vindicator and MacGuffin, which had proved, and Brigadier also was in his pedigree. The three greatest white dogs were all concentrated in Sunnyday, and he passed it to Reliance. And Reliance was even better and passed it on.
So do you think that one ought to line breed or look further afield?
Well, line breeding is all very well, but you've got to have something very good to line breed with. And if the dog, the bitch you're breeding with, shares the same fault as a dog that you're either intending to mate her to or to which you are line breeding, then that is a bad policy. If you can find a dog which has, in good measure, the points that you wish to improve in your bitch, and that she is related to in such a way that she can be line bred, yes, that's fine. But they are all line bred. They are all the same family. Some of them may be less intensively line bred, but they all go back to those four dogs. Reliance, Brigadier, MacGuffin, Vindicator. All of them. And before that, other dogs that are all behind them. And there's no getting away from it. We're all line breeding all the time. Very close line breeding can be very, very effective. The Potters with the Gardenias did a wonderful job on mating half brother to half sister. And then they used a different stud dog and then brought back to the same mother, to the same bitch, and then they used the bitches from that mating back to the sons of her sons out of previously to this. And they bred, so they won 7 region trophies, which is never been done by anybody else.
Yes.
And they were very, very successful. And other people made use of it and made use of line breeding. But it is really, you must combine looking at using line breeding with selection. Don't double up on the faults. And don't let them go too far in one direction. Too strong, too coarse, or too fine. Stay in the middle. Remember that perfection is in the middle of the stand. That's it.
The pictures on the wall. What's this one over here?
Well, that is Buller, Champion Velhurst Vindicator. He has always been pretty well a beau ideal for me of how a bull terrier should look. You will see that he has a good length of leg, a short back, not over short, well-turned hindquarters, well-angulated hocks, tail off his back, a crested neck, and a long, quality head with the eye high set, the ears right on top. He looks an aristocrat, and that's what he was, both structurally and temperamentally. A great dog. Champion Velhurst Vindicator.
Now, going to many shows these days is fairly easy as regards transport and covering the mileage, whether you're flying abroad or just going up to London to a show. But what was it like pre-war?
Well, it was on a much smaller scale. Everything was on a smaller scale. Crufts was a 2-day show, but it was the only 2-day show. Well, before the Kennel Club also was 2 days, but all the others were 1-day shows. And as far as travel was concerned, some people had cars, the majority I think had cars, but a lot of us used to go by train, because there was a system that if somebody organised a trip to a show, you could take the dogs free in boxes, provided you put them in the guard's van. And we used to do that, which reduced the cost of travel a great deal. And I, being a busy farmer, used to go from up overnight to shows like Blackpool and Edinburgh and so on, and cut it down, travel overnight. On one occasion I took a dog, Champion Tartary Kilsey Brumus, to Euston, and a very hot night in June it was, and I saw a porter and I said to him, what platform does the Blackpool train go from? Well, he said platform 13. So I found a train in platform 13 and I settled Brumus in a nice cool corner of the guard's van, and just along the way I found a corner seat and I took my bag and my jacket, took my jacket off because it was so hot, and went to buy a paper. When I came back, the train, complete with Brumus and my jacket and my wallet, had set off for Perth.
Oh dear.
In Scotland. First stop Carlisle. And I had no money at all, and my dog was away, and I went and saw the station master, and he lent me £1 to see me through the night. And I got to Blackpool, and I waited nearly all day, and at 2 o'clock they had the van. They used to bring the dogs from the station in a van in those days, the Blackpool show. And Brumus came out of his box, and I took him into the ring. Douglas Grinsley was judging, and he went into the ring, and I regret to say made rather a large pool.
I'm sure he did.
Poor dog, he'd been in his box for about 14 hours. And more than that, about 20 hours. And it was, he got nothing. But that was how we did it. There was a Mrs. Cook who used to run these trips, and a lot of us did that, but a lot of people still went by car, by road. The worst show I ever remember in the early days was actually just after the war. That was the Liverpool show, when there was a cloudburst or very, very heavy storms for 2 days, and the Mersey overflowed its banks, and they came through the show.
Okay.
And you saw dog boxes floating down the river. And but it was much more leisurely in those days. The entries were much smaller, there were far fewer breeds, But they still had the tenting, very much as you do now.
Do you think it belonged to a more affluent society, the hobby of dog breeding?
There were more people, more affluent people in it then, and it was much more leisurely. It was not in such a rush. There weren't nearly so many shows. There was usually a fortnight between the shows. But you wouldn't have one every week as you do now, sometimes more. And there were very few shows in the winter. They were all indoors. And of course the group system was only started after the war. They used to, the best in show, every dog went into the ring for best in show. Even at Crufts, and that used to take an hour and a half to judge, because every breed was in the ring.
Yes.
And there weren't anything like as many breeds as there are today. So that it was all more leisurely and more enjoyable, really.
Would you like to see us revert to those days?
No, I think that the good, strong competition is a good thing. And I think the group system is certainly better. But I would like to be able to see, from my angle, from the point of view of an all-rounder, I would like to be able to see more groups on a day, more breeds on a day, more groups on a day. But of course, that isn't always practical, because there just aren't the showgrounds that can accommodate that number.
Where does this idea come from that we have in the Bull Terriers, that once you've become a champion, you don't show it anymore?
Well, this arose originally through Raymond Oppenheimer. He made a self-imposed rule on himself that he would never show a dog after it had, for competition, after it had become a champion, except in the annual trophies. He never, in fact, did, in all the years that he was in the breed, win more than 3 cc's with one dog. And this became as an accepted mode of practice in the breed by the leading breeders. And nobody, it has always been, for many, many years now, since Raymond was an active exhibitor from before the war, not done to take a dog to win multiple cc's with the same dog. 3 cc's was considered enough. That qualified it as a champion, and it probably was enough to ensure that it was awarded a place on the, or it was competed in the annual trophies. Not many champions didn't compete in the annual trophies, and not asked to compete.
Well, now you see right across the breeds. Do you think this is a good system that we have?
Well, it's individual to the Bull Terrier. It's done in 1 or 2 other breeds, but generally it's not done. I myself don't think it's a good system. I think it's better that we should show, I don't think one should show a dog throughout the year, as some people do in other breeds. But I do think that it's good for the breed to have the top dogs in front of the public and in front of the judges when they're about. That if a dog wins its title in the south, I think it should be shown in the north and the west country. If it wins in the west country, it should be shown in the south or in London, and it should be shown in the north, so that everybody can see it. And if it's a really good dog, possibly decide to make use of it. I've never been in favour of it. I don't like out-and-out pot hunting, but I do think that it's not a bad thing to show a dog across the country.
Yes. What about the future for the Bull Terrier?
Well, I think there's a lot to think about. We have quite a few problems. I think, as I've mentioned already, the fronts, the shoulders, the upper arms, forelegs, want a lot of attention by breeders. They should not just breed for head, they should breed for the whole dog. There are other things. There's the renal problem, the kidney problem. There's the temperament problem.
Inherited things.
Inherited things, which are difficult to tackle. But I think we're now the 3rd most popular breed. In the last 2 months at the Kennel Club, Bull Terriers have registered more than Cairn Terriers, and that puts us in place number 3. We are breeding numbers as opposed to quality, and I think we should take a long, hard look at our breeding programs and be severe on bad temperament, which is getting a lot of publicity. There are far more good, kind, amiable Bull Terriers than there are bad ones. But we don't hear about those. We hear about the bad ones. And the welfare problem shows that there are a lot of problem bull terriers and a great many problem owners. And I think that the only thing that you can do for a bull terrier with a bad temperament is to give it a merciful, painless death. They're better underground.
How would you define a bad temperament? Where does the borderline come?
One that can't be trusted with its owner. A bull terrier is a fighting dog. I mean, it's there behind. But if you bring it up in a civilized way, there's no need for that to come to the surface. They should never be urged to fight. They should be kept as well-behaved children are kept. That is, in an orderly manner. They should be taught to behave and do as they're told. It can be done. There's hundreds and hundreds that are brought up that way. But as I say, we don't hear about that. The future of the breed is in the breeders' hands. The present breeders and the future breeders. And I pray that they will not let the breed down.
Yes, thank you very much. Eva Wetherell and Superlative are known throughout the world of bull terriers. Now, when did it all start?
Oh, it started with having bull terriers, not being a breeder. When I finished I trained as a nurse, and when I had to leave the hospital, the matron sent for me, and she said she hoped I'd enjoyed my training, and she was very pleased to say that the board had requested that she had requested the board permission to offer me a post in the hospital. And I was all agog. I was terrified of her anyhow. I just stood with my hands behind my back saying, yes, matron, and no, matron. And she said, well, it is my pleasure to offer you the sistership of the private ward, of the women's private ward. So I was so knocked down with a feather, and because I'd only just done my training, 4 years, so she said, don't you think that's very nice? So I said, I'm sorry, matron, but I must leave. She said, you must, nurse? What do you mean? So I said, well, I want to go home, and I'm not going to do nursing. She said, then what are you going to do? So I said, breed dogs. She said, what? I said, yes. She said, what kind of dogs? So, with a very dry mouth, I said, bull terriers, matron. She said, good heavens, how terrible. And she then tried to tempt me. She said, well, do think about this opportunity, because it's a very good salary for you. It's £70 a year.
Oh, very good,
Yeah.
yes. Mm.
So I crept out and went home to breed bull terriers.
Yes.
But that was only with my sister's kennel. I didn't come here until 1940.
So what had you bred with your sister's kennel?
Oh, well, I had a bitch of my own. And the first mating I did was I didn't do it, it was a still mating. My sister's stud dog, Velha's Viking, nipped smartly out and mated my bitch, who was called Midhurst Rhoda. And they had a nice litter, and I gave my sister the puppies. She kept them. Them. I said, well, you better have the puppies and have the money from them, which she did, and she put her prefix on them, which of course was Velhurst. And the pick of that litter went to South Africa and became, let me think, Champion Velhurst. Oh, Christmas. I've forgotten his name, but he's very famous in Kenya. Very famous. He became a very famous champion. And, more importantly, he saved the life of the late Duke of Norfolk.
Oh, how did he manage that?
Well, Norfolk was shooting, and he shot and wounded an eland, isn't it? Eland, yes. And the thing put his head down and charged. This dog that I'd sent out there charged him and hung onto his nose and brought him to his knees, and somebody was able to walk right up to him and shoot him.
That
And
was lucky, wasn't it?
If he
Yes.
hadn't been there, Duke of Norfolk would be dead.
Yes, indeed. So then you spent about 10 years with your sister, did you? Before
All
you
my
came
life
to...
we lived there.
With,
All my life I lived with them.
So then you came to
Oh, when the
this
war
area.
broke out, Raymond came to lunch with us one day and nattered on about how difficult it all was. Oh, we've been over here to see this cottage when he first built it, made it for Tom, and seen it. It was very nice. Of course, he wouldn't like this now.
No.
This is all bad stuff. And he rang me up one morning and said, "We'll get lunch with me tomorrow." So I said, "Oh, I'm busy or something." I was doing Red Cross then. In the war, I was lecturing to the Red Cross. So he said, "Come and have tea. Come and have lunch with me." So I came over and had lunch. I think, what the devil's wrong? I thought there was something wrong in the kennels. And he asked me if I would consider keeping the place running till the war was over, and he would probably get Tom back, but in any case he wanted to be seen through the war years. He didn't know about it after the war.
Yes.
And he had two boys, two young men, and Tom were doing the kennels, but Tom had gone off. He'd been in the army 6 months, or nearly 6 months. And so I said I would think about it. No, he hadn't been in the army then 6 months, he had just gone. I didn't come for 6 months after that. Tom there. And my sister, you see, was married to Stephen, a colonel, and he was called up immediately.
Yes.
And they went up to Nottingham, to Welbeck. And I obviously went with them. They closed their kennels, and I went there with them. And then one day Raymond rang up again. He used to fidget. I learnt that in later years. He kept ringing up and saying, "Are you coming? Have you changed your mind? Aren't you coming?" So I took a big breath and said, "Well, I'll go and have a look at it, see if I like it." And I was not a bit enthusiastic. It was so different from home. So I came down here on a Boxing Day. The snow was up to the windowsill. It was horrible. I hated the whole place. By then, the boys in the place had wrecked this house.
Oh dear.
The carpet had been peeled off the floor. They were so filthy. And no, it was dead beat. There was nothing, no pictures, no nothing. Just 2 or 3 armchairs for men to sit in. So I looked round, picked up the telephone, rang Peggy. I said, "I can't stay here. This is the most frightful dump I've ever been in. I can't stay here, Peggy. It's dreadful." So she said, "Hey, steady on." She said, "You promised Raymond you'd help him." She said, "Don't make up your mind like this. Wait a bit. See how it goes. And in the first place, talk to him." Well, so next day I talked to him. And of course, in those days, money was a lot freer. He said, "Get what you want, get what you want." I said, "No, I don't want to get what I want. I don't want to stay." However, we dragged on. Because he was a very clever man. He knew where my heart was with the dogs. And with the greatest possible speed, he saw to it that I was embroiled in the breeding myself, you see.
Yes.
And then there was no way back. No way back.
So how did he manage to embroil you?
Well, my old bitch that came with me died. She was 12, 14. And he bought me that bitch. That is satin, champion's spotted satin. I bought her from George Cussons for me. She was a beautiful bitch. She was by my beloved dog, belonged to my sister Champion Velhurst, Vindicator. She was by Vindicator and she was out of a daughter of MacGuffin, which was absolutely my cup of tea, you see. And so Crafty Mester bought her. But he bought her unseen because he was in the Air Force. And he told me, he said, "I'm going to give her to you on one condition. I don't want any of this sloppy business of yours falling in love with her, saying, oh, just because she's sweet or something." He said, "If she isn't absolutely up to the mark that you and I want, she goes back." He said, because I could see you saying you would like her just as she's by Buller. Buller was by Vindicator. Was Vindicator. Anyhow, it was her, and she was lovely. And I had her, and she was the first superlative. And well, not my first bull terrier, but she was my first superlative. And had a lot of fun with her. And she did very well. She did me very well. She made me 2 champions. Or 3 champions, I've forgotten. 3 champions. 2 champion, no, champion superlative. Sandman was the first dog in the prefix. Champion superlative Silver King was another. And his sister was champion superlative Sweet Ra. And that pair, Sweet Ra and Silver King, I think I'm right in saying they were the first pair of champions to be born one bitch for about 36 years. I'm not a great one for record keeping, but I had to get down to the ring.
It's an achievement, isn't it?
I try to remember, but it's difficult. And that's where they all started from.
So what happened when the war came to an end and all the boys came back?
Oh, well, there were various ways. And my sister, the clincher was, when the war was over, my brother-in-law came back and he didn't want to have so many. You see, my sister had a big boarding kennel, which I ran. And my brother-in-law came back and said, no way are we going to that lot again. And so she said, so they posed a little question for me. You see, I thought, well, no boarding kennel to run, not just running a few bull terriers. Well, she always had about 12 or 15, but you can do that with one hand, you know, when you're used to desire. And then Raymond came with crunch for Raymond. I said, well, I was going to go. I couldn't do it. However, when my brother-in-law said that he wasn't going to open another big boarding kennel, then I saw my way to falling in with Raymond's ideas. And he said, well, you'll be much better off staying with me, because you and I, we agree in principle on everything. And so in the end, I gave in. It was a very gloomy day, I remember, when I gave in. I thought, oh, what have I done? I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life. I can't do it. And I remember I felt very depressed.
Yes.
But it seemed so permanent, you know, which it has been. But
permanent in the nicest way rather than in the fearsome way you were thinking of at the time.
I've been very happy. Life has its ups and downs. Everybody does. But I had tremendous fun. Great fun. Great pleasure we had. Well, one thing about Raymond, he really loved his dogs. He just wasn't... At first, when I knew him, I just thought he was just a young man with a lot of money, wanted some show dogs. But he soon got rid of that idea for me. I couldn't have ever joined him. Never. But I mean, the dogs meant everything in the world to him. Everything. Nothing came between him and his dog. Nothing. And...
so you had your own superlative dogs.
Yeah, we had Ormondy. And we went, you know, I show. Oh, one of the things was that I shouldn't, as I was, you didn't know me then, but I was supposed to be a good handler, you see. And one of my terms of condition was that I never went in the ring and handled against him.
Oh, yes.
For a certain limited number of years, you see. So I thought, well, who cares? So I let that ride. And then, you know, almost before he could sneeze, I had more bull terriers here than he had. He went one day and said, do you know you've got more dogs than me? I said, yes, I worked that one out. I must place some of them. Oh, he said, I've got a better idea. I said, what's that? He said, we'll be partners. Officially. Because we, you know, we consider ourselves partners. So he was dashing off. He used to go to the office in those days. He said, well, look, I'm going to be late for the office. I've got a board meeting at 10:15. I'm off. I said, hey, not so fast. What about this business? What does it mean being a partner? And from that day to this, I've never found out. We never discussed any further. No papers, no writings, no signings. We just said, okay. we'll get on with it. So it did.
Good. And it worked out well.
Perfectly. Yes, we were quite happy with it. And yes, it was very nice. We never had any argument except once, only once, just before Raymond got very seriously ill. And looking back on my life, I think then he knew he was very ill. Because he sat down one afternoon and said to me, look, tell me something. Have you and I ever seriously quarrelled? I said, what a funny question. Because it don't be daft, said we. Go hammer and tongue, we were always enjoying each other. And I said, oh, I can't remember. The moment he said yes, but it was about her.
And she?
Yes. Summer Queen. And she was a very, very good bitch, and she was a good mover. And behind, and that's a rarity. She was a superb mover behind. And I remember Amy saying to me one day, well, you've got this great bitch, how the hell are you going to mate her now, Miss Clever Bitch? You used to call me Clever Bitches, or Miss Noel. Miss Noel, how are you going to mate her? I said, I'll tell you how I'm going to mate her. To the first good son of her sire that comes. He said, oh, you've got to... I said, well, one will come one day. So I, just like a cat and mouse, I sat down and waited. And one day, Busty, who was my great friend, rang me up and said, come and look at these puppies, dear. And I went. And she showed me a 6 weeks old puppy. She said, I'm thinking of keeping him. Have a look at his mouth. Because they all thought I was an expert on mouths. She said, is he going to go undershot or not? So I said, well, he might, but I don't think he will. If you take care of him, he won't. Give him plenty of big bones. So that was the day I saw the great champion Fidgety Flasher, who was later to become the Fidgety Flasher. And we set him, he was 6 weeks old, and I had a good look at him and all round, and thought to myself, my God, that's the dog I'm waiting for. He had a little cold black eye. He's good behind, but he didn't have a very strong front. And he didn't have a very great head, but he was well coupled, and I liked him. So I waited and waited again. And one day Busty said to me, come and have a look at this dog again. I think he's all right. So I went and had a look at him, and I thought he was all right. He didn't have a lot of hair, and he didn't have a strong front, but she got a lot.
Yes.
So it didn't matter. That is, heads have come on. And so I said to her, I'm going to make Maisie gay to him one day. She said, what? He's only 12 weeks old. I said, yes, well, as soon as he can take a bitch. I worked out when she was going to be in season. And I said, will you take her? She said, will I take her? She said, do you want me to pay you a stud fee for bringing her? I said, well, all right. And I did just that. I took her down. And he mated her on his own when he was 8.5 months old. And I had 12 puppies. And in those 3 champions.
Marvellous.
There would have been a champion bitching if the man had let her fall down a mine and kill herself.
Oh, dear. Goodness me. Yes. So how did you manage to rear these 12? Because it's a hard job, isn't it?
She
did it.
Of course she did. They took her to the... she was done at the college because my own vet didn't want to take her. I never left an animal with a vet in my life. And I took her to college. And Raymond, the only time in his life, he went with me because he knew I adored her. And she was a terrifying size. And it was very hot weather. So he got the rolls out and we drove her ladyship to the college. And then Raymond went and had a miserable hour sitting in the car while I went in with her. And I never take my eye off them, I won't. And stayed there. And the first puppy out of the bag was champion superlative Brinhead. He was a big, lusty lad. And he came out yelling his head off. So I wiped him up. I used to dry my own puppies. So I stood there and wiped him up. And the vet who did it was awfully nice. I've forgotten his name. He's a Welshman. Vaughan, Professor Vaughan. He wasn't a professor then. I was Professor Vaughan. And he said, give him to him, and I put him down here. And he went and put him under. They have infrared lamps clipped on the side of the wall, and he put him in a dish on the floor. In about 5 minutes later, there was a terrible yelling and screaming going on, and he'd gone right across, right across.
Looking for Mum.
They said they'd never seen a newborn puppy move so fast. That was Brynhead. And then he went on and on and on and on. And I said, my God, can't you leave some of those in? I don't want all these. At 12, if we got out. And Raymond nearly fainted when I went out. And they were yelling and screaming and scrabbling. Because I'd just taken a shopping basket, you see. And yeah, they were all right. And he said to me, you must get a foster, get a foster. As soon as you go, don't forget, the vet said. I said, no, don't want fosters. They bring disease, I'll manage. He said, now get a foster, don't be big-headed. So I said, Raymond, come on, let's get home. And we got home, and I got a little puppy box that I bought when I first came here, and put 6 strongest puppies in it on a nice warm bed with a bottle. And the ones that didn't look quite so good, they were all strong puppies, they were all lusty lads. And the others that didn't look so strong, I put them to their mother. And I put a bed alongside her bed, and I slept beside her for 5 weeks. And every 2 hours, I switched the 6 and 6. And the funny thing was, when I finally put them together, they still kept to their time. It was the most interesting pattern to see. They used to lie quite contented, and when the others stirred and said, oh, I'm hungry, we're going. When they went, their shift went on, the others didn't go on.
Amazing, isn't it? Yes.
There was only one smallish one in the litter. It was him, Champion Superlative Chunky. He was a little, cheeky little puppy, even when he was born. And he was always first. But he didn't seem to make much of a job of his milk at first, of his teat, when he used to get a bit lost. So I thought, well, I'll complement his feeds with Complan. So I made some, either goat's milk or Complan, I forget now, and offered it to him in a bottle. And he was so angry, he put his hands up, pushed the bottle away, and made a terrible face. Said, what, my mum? And I put him down by his mum, and he rushed to the bar. And he wouldn't let go. So I just let them get on with it. And there were no weak ones, there were no poor ones.
Very good.
And what I regret is that I've never been keen on photography. I never took any pictures. 12 beautiful puppies.
It's a shame, wasn't it?
Yes, they were lovely.
You had your hands full anyway, didn't you?
Oh, I did.
You must have been worn out.
Fight like Kilkenny cats. Brynhead was a hell of a fighter and when he grew up, he was the sweetest dog ever. He got it all out of his system.
You were saying just now, talking of puppies, that you believed everything they learnt by the time they were 8 weeks old, they remembered always.
Yes, well, but 8 weeks, up to 8 weeks, everything you can teach them up to 8 weeks. Well, that isn't an original thought of mine. It's a very great German who wrote a wonderful book about pattern of behaviour, dog behaviour. And I proved it. Having read that, I set out to prove it. And it's quite true. I used to teach my puppies. I used to spend ages on them. I used to go to bed till about 12 o'clock. I used to sit in the whelping kennel with them. Because they whelped in the house, you see, in that room there.
Yes.
They were all born there. And they went to the kennel at 16 days. And I have a nice stool. And I used to sit out there, fall for sleep half the time, with a lap full of puppies. And as I came back across my garden, the stable clock would be striking 12. But I didn't care. And, I taught them to come. And they would come when I called them. I just had to say, when they were quite tiny, come. And they would come, I'd raise my hand. And I taught them to retrieve a ball and give it. Give it back to me. No growling. It was very useful. Very useful later in life.
Yes, oh yes. And much harder to teach them later in life too.
Yes, oh yes, much. No, they were very quick. From my point of view, I've always found bull terriers to be very quick learners. Very, very quick. I mean, I brought scores of puppies in my time in the house-to-house train. And give or take a minute to 48 hours, and they were clean.
So what was the
I think
secret that you had?
Well, secret is if I had a lot of energy, I think, and I watched them and put them out when they wanted to go. I think dirty. When anybody tells me they've got a dog they can't house train, I'm afraid I say lazy owner. And it's harsh words, and I dare say I'm wrong, but that's how I feel.
Yes.
Because they've always been automatically clean. They just are in their nests. Watch them for hours in it. As soon as they can toddle, you know how soon they can walk about, because you can see the marks on the sawdust where they've trailed their little feet. And when they get up and totter about 4 weeks, 3.5 to 4 weeks, and they will walk out of their beds and wet on the sawdust. So what I used to do is to leave the door open so they could get out if they wanted to. We had ramps. And I used to gather them up and put them on the grass. And by the time they were 6 weeks old, they were all big enough and trained enough. I used to just pick their tins up, clap my hands and say, "Come on, potties, everybody, quick." And they run out and sit down with that self-righteous expression.
Yes.
So it's my turn to go. And they sit down in a row. And it was quite one of my showpieces. People used to come and say, "Would you like to see how I train puppies?" And if she won't go out, I still say to her, "Come on, potty," she goes.
Yes.
If she won't go out, you tell her to go potty, she still goes. And she's 10. But it was a wonderful sight to see 7 or 8 little white bull terrier fatties all toddling down and going to the potties. It's wonderful.
And you like to do a little obedience work with them, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, but I can't do. I'm not very clever at all. I'm not given that way. I used to train my dogs up to Margaret because I was such an admirer of hers. And
That's Margaret Williams.
yes, and if you just spend an hour just walking around, heeling and walking in and out like that, it teaches your dogs such a lot.
And what age do you feel they're the most receptive for that sort of training?
Well, if I used to go when they were about 9 months old, but I would take a young adult. I mean, Rheingold was unspeakable when I got her back. Her mother was on breeding terms, and I didn't get possession of her until she was, I think, 15 or 16 months old. She pulled like a train. She was nervous, she was frightened. And, she was hell, undiluted hell. So Raymer said, "You'll never get that one in the ring." I said, "I will. I'll get her in the ring." He said, "You won't." I said, "I will." And so I took her to obedience and training in a little room. It was winter, so I had to go into Maidenhead, and there was a small sort of room behind a pub where men had a social.
Yes.
And they did that. And we used to go there for show training classes. Anybody could go. So I took her in. The first night, I sat on a bench, and she took a flying leap from the ground. She was on it and scrubbed over my head. She nearly went through a fanlight thing, and she damn nearly got away. However, to show you how quickly they respond, she was so nervous that night, and nobody else could get a hand on her. She was so frightened. She would have been a shy biter, you see. Well, we all had to change dogs and handle each other's dogs. And before I could say anything, he had the lead, and he walked off round, taking her round. And to my greatest surprise, she was steady. So I didn't bother doing what I was supposed to be doing. I just watched this bit. And then it was my turn to take her over again, and I put her through her full show training I had given at home, and she stood like a rock. So I was rather pleased. So I came back and I telephoned Raymond and told him. He said, well, he didn't believe it. "Oh," he said, "that's nothing. She'll lie down tomorrow by the judge." I said, "She'll do neither." She came home best of breed.
Good.
So it was very good. And Margaret Williams and I were delighted.
Yes, I'm sure.
And Ben of Highthorpe would not face the ring. He used to shake like a jelly, and he weighed about 65 pounds. He used to stand with his head on my knee and shake me. He was so nervous. But I took him to obedience. He liked that. He liked it very much. But he never liked the shows. But he became a champion, a great champion. And he was runner-up in the Ormond Jugs. He should have won it.
We all say that, you know.
The reason he should have done.
Yes.
He was better than his half brother. They're both half brothers.
Yes.
In the cold light of day, should have done. I know those that should have won, those that shouldn't have won. He should have won.
Yes.
And there was a hell of a good dog in the meeting, but he was one hell of a dog.
You were saying just now that Summer Queen up there, it's a beautiful picture of her, but that heads are different now from then.
Yes. She lacked foreface, and she was a bit shallow in head, but she had a very good bite and a marvellous eye, good front, and she excelled in making shape and terrific quarters. And we had no movers then. They were always to crab across the ring. She put everybody to shame. That's why that was her great. She did very well for the breed. But apropos what you said just now, people saying they're not as good as they used to be. You know, there's an old saying, which is true, old men forget. So do old women, I forget.
You're surrounded with pictures to remind you, though, what they were like.
But it's true that, of course it's true, in today, in the ring, you see one or two youngsters going up, and they're not quite as top class as some that you've had and that others have had. But that's the way of the world. It's this endless argument of who is best. Because in different generations, you can't compare. You cannot compare different generations of dogs. You can't. When they were good in their day, yes, they were very good. But were they all that much better than today? God knows. It's a big question.
What are the qualities they have now that they didn't have in earlier years?
The quality they have now, they didn't have. Well, nowadays, good heads are 10 a penny. I mean, now it would be remarkable to get bad heads. I can't think of when I ever saw a really bad head on a well-bred dog. I make that on a well-bred dog a bit. Yes. They've all got good heads. And when I was starting, you went for make and shape and as good a head as you could get, and had to concentrate a bit on heads. But it has been said, I suppose it does hold water, that people have concentrated too much on heads and they've forgotten the make and shape. I was very, very lucky. I built my house with bricks by using Bradbourne's Prince Regent. He was the best bull terrier behind the collar I've ever seen, or I would think anybody else. He was a miracle of making shape, a miracle. And I was the luckiest woman alive that he came across my path, and that I had the wits to use him. I always remember Raymond when we went with me to look at him, not to do the meeting, because Raymond wouldn't go near meetings. I went to have a look at him. My sister went with me, and Raymond went. And it was snowing, I remember that day. And we went out to see him. And so when we were coming back in the car, Raymond was very quiet. And he suddenly turned to me, he said, "Well, little Miss Know-all, and who are you going to make to that dog?" So I said, "Ruby."
No, quite.
I gave up when I was 70.
Yeah, I was thinking from the point of view of what qualities we've got now that we didn't have then.
No, I think they've got nice dark eyes. We used to have a lot of light eyes. We had one or two dogs way back in the 1920s. And the 1929s, they all had yellow eyes, Chick of Charter, man. And all the big leading size. We had a lot of light eyes then. And they soaked the breed and they came through. But it's gone. You get rid of everything in time.
Yes.
If you've got patience and guts, you stick to it. I can't be doing with these people who say, "Oh, we've got this. Oh, we'll never get rid of it. Oh, there's no that." Of course you'll get rid of it. Apply yourselves, and they can do it if they want to.
You still feel that the earlier ones were the better movers, do you?
No, not the very early ones. The early ones, if you go into the 1920s, they were total cripples. No, the good movement came in about McGuffin's time and Vindicator's time. Good movement came then. And people had begun by then to breed more intelligently. They didn't, when they made a bitch, want to mate a bitch, say, "Now, who's the latest champion?" They were tending to go to the dog that suited that bitch and get it somewhere. And that was mostly due to Dr. Vivers, who was the man who did Regent's Park Zoo. He was the man in charge of it there. He owned the Regent Bull Terrier. His dogs were good, his dogs could move. And, there were plenty of dogs that could move. Don't believe what people tell you.
So how did you select your stud dog?
Like I told you, you looked at your pedigree, see what your bitch was bred, how she was bred, where her main virtues come from, and do your best to line beat it. That's what I would do. See?
So can you give me an example of one of your dogs that you did that with?
Well, yes, I'm a queen. She was by Snow Vision. And I used Chamois Fidgety Flasher, also by Snow Vision.
And you felt that was where the best points had come from?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You always line breed then,
Because
do you?
you know what you're doing, you know what you know what to expect. You should do, you know your stuff. You should know your pedigree, you should know the animals that went to pedigree up. You see, if you know your work, know your breed, when you look at a pedigree, this probably sounds a bit far-fetched, but it's not. When I look at a pedigree, I see the animals. I see the, but instantly, it's in the mind's eye, dog appears. You can see them, you knew them, and you see, oh yes, so and so. You can see them,
Yes.
and you remember them. That's if you've done your stuff. You take notice of the dogs when.
Well, do you feel there's any value in going outside the line occasionally?
If you've got to get rid of some desperate fault, I suppose there is. But I've never had to.
So you would recommend that you always line bred?
Well, if you've got some, if you're fortunate enough to get a good bitch, basically free from faults, I would also go back into her.
Now, going on a bit, you were telling me earlier that you were telling me the tales of the badgers, some of the exciting things you've had to deal with that weren't connected with the showroom.
Well, bull terriers, at least our bull terriers, are great people for hunting things. They chase foxes and had one bitch who called her fox and did him a fair amount of damage. Better not talk about it at the RSPCA. And we've got a lot of badger sets, and I say we, I mean in Raymond's land, in his gardens. And badger sets are fearsome things. They're great big places, big as that room there when you get into them. And I should know, I've been in one.
Actually in the set?
Well, we'd had the badgers, they'd gone under some fencing at the bottom of the place, the woods, into the neighbouring farmer's field. And I hadn't spotted this. I used to make it my job to go round and spot new sets. And then I used to get the gardeners to go round and put some stakes in, close enough to stop bull terriers going in, but a space big enough for a badger to get in. And I thought I could live with my conscience. And suddenly, there was a pair of dogs missing. Champion Ormonde Silver Starshine and my bitch, my great Ruby, I can't remember her name. Oh, help.
Never mind, she was Ruby for you, that's the point.
No flashes, damn.
Yes.
And so she was quite a girl. And also she was the granddam of Summer Queen, you see. And later, so one of the gardeners came across, he said, you know, miss, I know where your dogs are. I said, do you really? He said, yes. So I went down, and we all dutifully laid down and put our ears to the ground, and we could hear these dogs panting and puffing and scratching and yelping. So evening was coming on. So Raymond said to the men, get back quick and fetch some spades, and we'll dig them out. And in the beginning of the dig, I had to sit, if you please, with my legs inside the hole while these men were digging on top. I was expecting a spade through my legs at any moment. That was really frightening.
Why were you sitting like that?
Stop it falling in on them.
Oh, I see.
They put a sack over my legs and stopped the roof collapsing. My little legs went. So Raymond said, "Oh, you're all right. Don't worry, don't worry." I said, "Well, don't you start digging," because he couldn't use a spade. Oh, he said, "Yes, I'll dig." I said, "If you take a spade, I shall get up." I said, "Let the men do it." So the men did the digging, and I felt safer.
Yes.
And there, Morgan said, "All right, miss, we won't hurt you." And then we opened it. It was quite a big opening. It is a very big opening. And we could hear these damn dogs snuffing and barking. So I knew they were somewhere near the badger. And so Rudolph, who was starshine, came out backwards. And I managed to get hold of his hock. And I had some leads in my hand, and I'd made a loop of them. I slipped a lead over his hock and got hold of him and tried to hold on, but he pulled away. The lead came off and he went back in. So he slipped twice. The bitch wouldn't come back. She was just beginning to growl at me. So I thought, well, I'll have to put up with it. So I said, "Well, Morgan, I've got to get them out. What shall we do?" So he said, "I'll tell you what we'll do, miss. The only way to do is, miss, you must go in." I said, "I can't go into a badger," said Morgan. He said, "Yes, you can. We'll hold your legs." So Jerry, one of the gardeners, and Morgan took hold of my ankles. I was in jodhpurs, fortunately. I laid on my stomach and wriggled forward, and they held me by the ankles.
So it was as wide a hole that you could get down there.
Yes, and so I wriggled forward and wriggled until I got hold of a leg, and I got a bull terrier's leg, and I pulled it out and managed to get a lead round it, 2 leads round it, both legs, and pulled. I was afraid of pulling their hocks out, their hips out. Slowly pulled him out backwards. And Raymond took hold of him and nearly let the damn thing go.
Oh.
So, having rescued him, I heard him get a great thump. I said, "Don't hit him." Raymond said, "Damn thing, he wants to go back." And so the next thing, I had to go back a second time and get Ruby. Oh, it was so hot. The heat down there below.
I think it smelt too.
No, badgers are clean things. It's a bit strong, because they're strong animals.
Yes.
Not nasty. It's foxes that stink. Badgers don't smell. And that's my little story. I got both the dogs out.
And then articles, of course, as I went on, and then I went from kennel boy to kennel man, and I was with the Lanarth Fox Terriers for a number of years, stripping Lanarth Bracken, Lanarth Supreme, Lanarth Series, all these lovely Fox Terriers. And then I was with Great Danes, the Benjean Kennels down in West Wales, Haverfordwest. And then, of course, I went to the European Supreme Dog Bureau. Such a title. And he was a rascal, this man. He was a sort of cast-out horse dealer or something. But he had this magnificent emporium in Queen's Road, Bayswater. And he'd sold good quality dogs. But, and I had a couple of years there with him. And then I left well, by that time the slump had come and we were all out of work anyway, which was the recession of the time.
So were you minding dogs there?
Oh, yes,
Of all varieties?
Yes, all breeds there. And my job was to just trot up the road to Kensington Gardens and exercise them. I remember losing a puppy once on a foggy November morning there. He told me not to let it off the lead, but oh dear, I wanted it. It would run faster than I did. And off it went. And he said, don't worry. I was in tears, but he said, don't worry. We'll get it back Sunday. I said, how can you? Why Sunday? He said, oh, you come with me. Well, he went up to Club Row, and he went along looking at all these puppies for sale, and he saw one character there, and he said, that's mine. He says, right. He says, I'll give you £50 for it. And that was that. Stolen dogs, you see.
Yes.
I got it back. He knew exactly where to go. As I say, he was a funny character himself. He knew all these people. But I left that firm. Then I found that I was doing better writing. I used to write for the Kensington News. I was the kennel editor of that. And then the war came. Well, then when the war, well, I was RAF VR and then ferry pilot. And after the war, I resumed writing again. I edited the Dog Lovers Library of 30 volumes, and I wrote 30 books myself, apart from the Dog Lovers Library. And now I've started publishing.
Yes.
Reprinting good stuff, anything that's very good, and the current price is far beyond the average means. Or then, if I can, I like to reprint it, provided the copyright is expired, or I can do a deal with the copyright holder, and then I reprint. I've done a pair on the Scottish Deerhound, a pair on the Collie, and a pair on the Labrador. So now I'm aiming high for colour printing now.
Yes.
That's expensive.
Yes. How did the touring around the shows with your books develop?
Well, I used to get such a heavy post asking for books, and then they always wrote, well, I'm at a show and I won't be able to come and fetch them, and I don't want it to go in the post. I said, are you going to such and such a show? Could you bring it with you? And I thought, oh, that's an idea. Why not take the shop to the market instead of the other way around? So I did, and I tried a few, and then, it grew. And at one time I was doing 25 shows a year. But I don't do that many now, not at 78, it's a bit much. So I cut it down to about 9 or 10. And I've also cut out some of the lovely shows like Kelso, some beautiful shows. Happy Place, oh, so lovely. But it's just too far for me now. I'm in Wales. It's an hour and a half's driving before I can turn left or right, you see. And the sun in my eyes in the morning, sun in my eyes coming home at night. I should have been stationed at Great Yarmouth, I think, delivering bloaters instead. Then I wouldn't have any sun bother.
You've always got an anecdote about any particular breed that comes to talk to you. Which is your favourite breed?
Well, I tried desperately hard not to have a favourite, but because I've had a mixture myself. I've had a mongrel was my first as a boy. Then I had a husky, then a dingo. At the moment, I have a Pyrenean mountain dog, but she's a 14 years old girl. Still going strong, but I do have to lift her ear flap when I talk to her now. She's getting a bit deaf.
When you go to the shows, and the shows are in groups,
Yes.
which is the nicest group day for you?
Oh, you mean from a selling point of view, selling books?
Or from the dogs?
Generally. Oh, well, hounds and gun dogs are my two most profitable groups, shall we say. Mind you, I've just come back from the Welsh Kennel Club show, and my best turnover was the last day, which was Terrier Day.
Yes. Is there more literature on some breeds than others then?
Oh, yes. Some have a plethora, too much. Poodles, cockers, fox terriers, almost too many books on them. And nothing really good has been printed lately, but they will be coming back. They're coming. Airedales are already coming back, and Sealyhams. There's an interest in those. But at the moment, the one breed I can't satisfy is bull terriers. They all want the very early ones, Granny Adie's books and books like that, and of course they want the pedigree in the envelope at the back.
Oh, of course, yes.
Very often missing. And sometimes they're only in photostat. They're not the real thing, so I have to be very careful. Oh, yes. But Armitage's books and Arthur Heald and some of those, they are excessively rare, but very few people ask for those because they're not well known. But Raymond's books now, I mean, I think the Bull Terrier Fancy lost their best friend when he went. He was a wonderful man, and of course, he used to pay all the bills of the cost of printing. And it's a pity Dog World don't splash some money now and reprint MacGuffin and its partner, because they're wonderful books and they're always in demand. I'm constantly telling people who ask for something, I said, you've left it years too late. You should have snapped them up at the beginning when they were first published.
Do you think they really want them because of the information inside, or just because they've seen in more modern books the mention of Bar Sinister and MacGuffin, and feel that they ought to have one?
It's a mixture of both reasons, really. There are quite a number of avid collectors in the Bull Terrier world. One wonderful young chap who was collecting, I won't mention his name, but he has, through pecuniary circumstances, has had to sell his collection entirely. And it just happened that another avid collector, client of mine, just happened to be flush, unexpectedly flush, at the very moment when the other collection was on the market. So no harm was done, and the books are still in good, loving hands. They'll be looked after. And both of them cared for their books, I know, because they gave them these wrappers, and they always wanted them in as fine condition as possible. But the demand for the early ones, Hogarth, for instance, although it's limp cloth and wood pulp paper, it's not the best production. It's still an important book.
Now, the Bull Terrier by Hogarth is in several editions.
Yes.
Are some more valuable than others?
Well, the first, well, that's usually the first edition of any book is more valuable than the others.
Even though the others might have more useful information because it's been updated?
Yes. Occasionally there are exceptions in a few very rare books where a second or third edition is 2 or 3 times the value of the first, but normally it's always the first edition. When a publisher has a new manuscript submitted and he's a bit dubious about how strong the market may respond, he's going to play safe and print the minimum number, just a few hundred more than the 3,000 orders he's got, or 1,000 orders he's anticipated. Play safe. And he'll probably only bind up half of them anyway. He'll keep the remainder in sheets to bind up if called upon later on. And then when he finds that it's selling like hotcakes, well, then the next edition he'll print double or treble the quantity. And so there are more of them floating about years afterwards, whereas the first edition has been passed on from friend to friend and over-thumbed and over-read and literally read to pieces. They disintegrate, and so they become scarce. And if that happens to an already scarce book, well, then the few survivors are rare. And that's where we come in.
Yes. What else did Hogarth write?
A wonderful little book on colour inheritance. That's specifically Bull Terriers. And one of his funniest books, which is excessively rare now, is The Travels of a Dog Show Judge, because he did judge all over the world, yes. And that's a very, very rare book, that one. But they were all published by our dogs, so of course they're not what we call hardbacks today. They're in stiff wrappers, which doesn't help to prolong their life very much. Consequently, they all become rare. It's just a question of time. They literally read to pieces.
Well, this one's in mint condition, isn't it?
It is, yes, absolutely pristine state. No damage anywhere. Well, I've looked after it now. This is one of the few books that has his full name in, too. Thomas William Hogarth, Galashiel, Scotland, 1935.
One of the other people that kept lots of notes but didn't actually publish anything about the same period, that's sort of before the war and during and after, was Kiri Fuller. What have we got here of hers?
Oh, well, I've quite a lot. of Elsie Keary Fuller's. You know, I bought the entire collection after her death, which included umpteen copies of the Bulletin, right from number 1 right through. She was the first editor, I believe she was, the first editor of the Bulletin, the Quarterly Bulletin. And I had innumerable sets of those. They've all gone out to bull terrier collectors all over the world now. I've just my one set left of my own, signed by several people, including Granny Adie, of course. And I bought all her notebooks and homeopathic remedy books, because she used to treat all her dogs herself homeopathically. Which is something that's in demand today. A lot of people are asking for books on homeopathy now, more than before in the old days. And then I had all her records, her stud records, even the blocks, photographic image. And each one is mounted on a mahogany base. He wisely insisted on having the blocks returned to her, and that's how she formed a collection. And that is part of the Bull Terrier collection. And one particular book always amuses me is I had the shock of my life when I found this dear old soul who was always looked rather prim and proper. And I used to see her years ago sitting on the bench with a bully's head on her lap, and she's got a penny clay pipe smoking away there. And when I opened all the books from her collection, one of the funniest ones I saw, the lovely leather binding, was the Decameron by Boccaccio. And I thought, Elsie, what are you doing with that? And then I opened volume 3, and hey presto, of course it was Elsie. All her lovely photographs of the bullies there, hundreds and hundreds of them, right from the beginning when she was with the little babies. Beautiful photographs, and she'd obviously taken great pains to have them bound up for posterity in this wonderful leather binding. But here's Elsie with look at the ears of the pup.
Yes.
Interspersed with various letters here and there. There she is again. These are her first little snapshots. Oh. It's a very flimsy one, or a double spread.
And the tissue in to protect them.
Yes.
There we go.
It's a very flimsy one, these tissues.
This one's July 1947. Jimmy looks like a tear, doesn't it? Blood. Beautiful, isn't it? Yes.
Guard tissues in front of every plate so that the pictures wouldn't stick together.
Carefully arranged.
And neat handwriting below each picture, naming the dog and the date and the place. And all her stud services are also in the collection, and what she charged and what she got, which is not always the same.
And I know. And in here we've got, these are her homeopathic remedies, aren't they, in there?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Fine one.
Yes.
Written out by hand and so on.
Yes.
Oh, this is prescriptions in here.
Prescriptions.
Oh dear, yes.
Everything imaginable.
Yes.
I mean, it's irreplaceable, as it probably all relating to one particular dog. Showing the course of treatment and how it resulted and so on. They're all dated.
She was most meticulous in this way, wasn't she? The same with.
She looked so casual at the shows, but she knew exactly what she was doing.
Yes, and you see her writing is so precise too. So. This is all about deafness. Homeopathic remedies for dogs apparently born deaf.
And then I have her copy of Pigeot's, the French work on homeopathy for dogs and cats. And in there, she's added her own observations, whether she agrees or disagrees with the dosage of certain remedies and so on. And there were also things like four-leaf clovers and pressed in the book, which she did regard as a lucky emblem. And one day I may tell you I had an experience which proved that they could be very lucky.
You believe
indeed.
as well?
I believe as well, yes. Yes.
Well, that's an interesting collection, isn't it? Because it brings a bit of the past back to us when we see that. And another book most of us try to collect is Rawdon Lee's.
Yes. He is more specifically terrier than the Stonehenge and the others before him, because he had a couple of volumes on the sporting breeds, and then another volume non-sporting, and then his terriers. Now, his terriers, the first edition, is almost twice as thick as the first edition of the other groups. He really went to town on the terriers, and it's the scarcest of the set too now. The sporting volumes are fairly easily obtainable, but the terrier volume is very scarce. And of course, it's illustrated by Arthur Wardle, which all helped to popularise it. That's an excellent book on terriers, and I was very fortunate in being able some years ago, about 25 years ago now, to buy the Lee collection, the family collection, not of all dog books, but just Rawdon Briggs Lee's own books. And presently I may be able to show you his books, say, on the fox terrier. He's got marginal notations and footnotes in his own hand in every volume, and then the next edition has got the previously handwritten notes now in print, and then still not satisfied, he's made some further emendations, which will be in black and white in the next issue. So if you see books on the shelf with little pink slips, that means it's the author's own copy. And then I have his general collection, the general dog books, again with pink slips, you see. And that shows us the exact history of the publication through its development from the first issue, the first edition, right through to the last issue of the last edition.
Yes, you were telling me earlier about the this piece, that sometimes you can tell something about the history of the actual book by whether it's been recovered there and so on. If it's a reprint.
But normally with a published book, you get all the relevant information on the title page. Today, a lot of publishers don't give the actual date on the title page at the foot as they used to. They now have it on the verso, on the back of the title page at the top. And then with each printing after that, then they will say reprinted such and so and so and so, all the way down. So you can see at a glance which issue it is, or which edition, rather. But if it's the first edition and then it's reprinted, say, 2 or 3 times, it's still a first edition, but not the first issue. It's only the first of the first that really counts.
And how can you tell that?
Well, in theory, then there should be no other listings or dates following that.
Even though it's the second printing?
It could be a second. Well, if it's a second printing, then it's still a first
Yeah.
edition, but it's a second printing. But very often there are variant issues, which is a smaller phase than an impression. Certain issues. The binder may have run out, say, of red cloth, and they're wanted in a hurry, and he hasn't time to wait for delivery of that particular cloth, so he'll take another cloth which has just got the right amount to do these 500 copies, and so you may get a blue cloth. For instance, Lee's sporting division, you see, in 2 volumes, he ran out of the maroon cloth in the end, and so the very last one, the rarest one of all, is in green cloth. And that's so little known that lots of even members of the ABA are unaware of its existence. But I have a pair, so I mean,
They do
really
exist.
They do, it does exist.
Yes. And would you call that a rare book then?
It's rare now because of by virtue of the fact that only a few odd ones were done in that colour, because they'd run out of the cloth. See, now here's a book, Horses and Riders, by Lionel Edwards and illustrated by Lionel Edwards. But inside here, it starts off with the sporting adventures of Psycho, a bull terrier.
Yes.
You see? Now, this is the first edition, 1946. Grey cloth, or beige cloth, if you like. 2 more issues. Still the first edition, still 1946, the same date, but different bindings.
Yes. Yes. But the contents are all exactly
Then
the
the
same.
question then is which came first, and that's always a problem. So we have to find out sometimes from the records of the publishers, or if it's a London house and it's pre-war and the premises were bombed during the war, they've lost all the files, we'll never know. So we usually look and see which is the final production, which has nicer finish, and that would have probably been the first one, and then they reprint again, cheaper and cheaper. But you see, there's 3, the same date, all the first edition, but 3 different variant bindings. And that's a bull terrier book to me.
Yes, oh yes.
I mean, more horses than bullies there, but the opening chapter, you see, is the bully. Oh, yes.
Yes, it's lovely too. Yes, and with his baby's hair.
Yes. Yes. Oh, yes.
There we are. Now here we've got a book that is most unusual, really. Bunty and Bianco. And was this privately published?
Oh, no, this is...
Whoops.
Right. Looks like Hyde Park. There, look. Oh, that's nice.
Now, this book is very collectible in that it's not just book collectors that want it, because it's a nice story in its own right, isn't it?
It is. It is indeed, yes. And it's strange how many retired naval officers like to have this too, because they all knew the dog. It's all based on fact, you see.
Oh, is it?
This is Frederick Warnes, the children's book publisher, the people who published Beatrix Potter and all those books. Yes. It's quite a character, this dog Nelson.
It looks it from the illustrations, anyway.
Yes, yes.
So when was that written? Or published, anyway?
Let's just see now. As I say, the modern ones have the dates at the back. There we are, 1938, you see.
So it's comparable with the last one we were looking at.
Oh, yeah. And it's dedicated to a naval commander again, you see. It's all naval.
Yes, so quite a variety of
Oh, yes.
people that are wanting one of these books on their bookshelves. They've really tasted very nice. Sure they did. Well, Doggy Hubbard, thank you very much indeed for all your time and patience. It's lovely to see some of the things that you have here and to learn a little bit about the Bull Terrier books. I shall look at them in great respect now. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure indeed, and it's most gratifying to find someone who's not only interested in their breed, but all the history and evolution and development of their breed.
Well, thank you. We are lucky with our forebears in that they wrote so much, really, aren't we?
Yes.
That we have got some stuff we can refer to.
That's
Well,
true.
thank you very much indeed.
Okay.